Our current inventory system works pretty good for keys. We can pick up multiple keys and toggle between them, but it doesn't do a very good job of dealing with our blaster. We can switch between keys, but our blaster stays on. And if I stop playing and start playing and just try to shoot, we're going to run into an error saying that it can't find any keys to try to use, and it's not trying to use our blaster instead. In fact, our blaster fires off constantly, but we still get this error message. If I go grab a key, the error's gone because it's able to use my key. It's able to find something, but it's still firing off, and this is definitely not the behavior that I want. So I want to make my blaster into an item. I want to make it into a first class kind of item that's an object that can be used by our player, just like the keys are. But I want to do this slightly differently. I don't want to take my blaster and pull it off of my player and then make it so that my player has to go pick it up. I want it to be just kind of their default item that they start with, or maybe an item that they can unlock and keep across multiple levels. For now though, since I only have one weapon, I'm going to make it the default that they've got, and they just kind of start with it. So to do that, we're going to need to make a couple of changes to our player and to our blaster specifically. Let's find the player object here in our sandbox and expand it out until we get to the blaster, which should be under the body upper and then the right arm, and all the way down to the right below this item point, we've got the gun object. If we go look at it in the scene view, let's go to the scene view, we can see that this is our object for the blaster, and I can turn it on and off by toggling the game object. I'm going to rename this from gun to blaster. And then we're going to take the blaster script from our player, and we're going to click and drag it and drop it onto the blaster here. That should move the script down to our blaster object, and it's got a plus there, and it should be removed from our player. You can see it's got the minus right there. And then we can go into our blaster and make sure that our settings are correct. So first thing we need to do is make sure we have a fire point assigned. And here you can see I'm in debug mode. In normal mode, we see only the fire point. But if I go to debug mode, I can see all of the other fields that are going to need to be assigned as well. We've got that animator, the player, and here it has a player input. We're going to adjust this a little bit though. Let's go open up our blaster script and let's make a few changes. First off, I don't want my blaster causing animations to happen. I want that to happen from my inventory system, so I'm going to delete the animator here. And I also don't want my blaster reading input. I want my inventory system doing that, so I'm going to delete the player input as well. I'm going to take line 14 and 16 and 17 and delete them all as well. So we've just got our awake down to getting a player right now, which also is probably going to be an issue. But for now, let's get the player. But we need to get a player in parent. So we'll do get component in parent, because we're no longer at the same level as our player. Remember, our blaster is a child object way down here, and our parent way up here has the player script on it. There's our player script. Let's go back into our blaster code though. Open that blaster script, and let's make the other changes that we're going to need. So our fire method should no longer call the set trigger to fire. We're going to do that inside of our player inventory, so I'll delete that as well. And I guess I'll delete out my rapid fire method, the update. I'm going to shrink this all down. So now I've got a very small blaster script, and I want this blaster script to be usable by my inventory. So let's open up our inventory. Let's save the blaster script and open up our inventory. Inside of our inventory, the first thing I want to do is add our new blaster to our set of items and equip it. I want to essentially call pickup and equip a blaster. But you can see here that the pickup method takes a key. And if I go look at our items list, well, we've defined this to take a key as well. So let's make something a little bit more generic. Instead of having a key or a blaster there, let's have this be some sort of shared thing. And I've got two options. I can go with an abstract class, a base class that they both share and inherit from, or an interface where they both just have the same or similar methods. And I feel like in this case, as with most cases, an interface is the best default implementation. If we find that we're reusing a whole bunch of stuff and reusing a bunch of functionality, we could switch it to an abstract class. But for now, let's start with an interface. And to do that, we're going to create a new interface that our key and our blaster will both inherit or implement. And let's call that item. So we're going to go into our key. And right at the end of our key, I'm just going to start typing a comma and item. IITEM. So it's an interface for an item. That's why I'm using iItem. I'll hit Alt-Enter and hit Generate Public Interface, or Generate iItem in New File is the one that I want. This should give me a new interface, which is in a new file, and it's going to say Public Interface. Oh, where'd it go? Public Interface iItem, or it says internal. I'm going to make that be public. Now our interface is going to need to have at least one method on it that allows us to use the item. It's going to need a couple other things, but the primary thing we need is a use method. So we're going to add a void use with a semicolon there and no parameters. Let's go back into the player inventory. And now in all of the places where we're using a key, let's replace key with iItem. So I'll take key and put in iItem. I'll copy that onto my clipboard and just start pasting it over all of my key entries. So my equipped key will now be essentially my equipped item. We'll have to rename that in a moment. The list will take iItems, and if I scroll down below, you can see that I start to have a couple errors. The first error is that iItem doesn't have a game object property. So it says iItem doesn't contain a definition for game object, so we need to add one. We can do that by hitting Alt-Enter and creating a read-only property. So I hit Enter and F12 to go to it, and we should get an interface property here, but it's going to be the wrong type. It'll be object instead of game object. So I need to go in here and put in game object, then save. Oh, we got to hit Alt-Enter and add the using Unity engine statement up to the top, then save. We'll go back into our player inventory, and now that error should be gone. We can now call GameObject.setActive on an iItem. It just has to be a mono behavior that has a game object that has a setActive on it. But as long as our interface is attached to a mono behavior, which in our case of a key, it is, it's just on an object that inherits from mono behavior, it's going to automatically have that game object and be able to call setActive. Now, the other issue that we have is down here in use equipped item. The equipped key check is giving an error because we're now comparing an interface to null instead of a class object to null. And the shortcut of just checking it without the double equals null doesn't work when we're doing it with an interface. So we need to replace it with a not equals null to make sure that our equipped key, or really our equipped item, exists. In fact, let's rename this to equipped item. And then save, do a build, and jump over to Unity, and let's just make sure that our key still works. We should still be able to pick up a key and use it, but probably not use our blaster. So here we are. I can click, and I get an error if I try to use my blaster as I expect. I'm going to go grab both keys. I can switch between them with my hotkey 3, and the keys still work. They still activate or toggle the lock, but my weapon doesn't shoot. So let's go back into the code and add our blaster as an item that we can use. To do that, we're going to need to pick up our item probably in awake. So we're going to add a little loop in our awake method to find all of our children that implement the iItem interface. That way I can put multiple items on the player character from the start, have them kind of initialize with those or have those be on the prefab, and then have them automatically be assigned. I can toggle them on and off, and I want to use these for items that I'm going to use across different levels. For items that I want to use in a single level, I'll just pick them up normally. So for the items that are children, like our blaster, we're going to find them with a get components in children, and we'll use a loop. So I'll do a for each var, and let's call this item in get components in children. I want the plural version to get the type iItem. So we want to get everything that implements that iItem interface. Then we want to pick up everything that's one of these items. Now, pickup doesn't take an iItem, so we're going to need to change the signature of it. I'll control click on it, and we'll change key to be item. And then I'm going to rename the key parameter here to be item. Actually, I need to make this iItem. I've almost missed my I for the interface. So there we go. I've now got a pickup that takes items and adds them, but you can see I've got another error because the item interface, the iItem, doesn't have a transform property. So just like we did for the game object, we'll hit Alt-Enter and generate a read-only property, hit F12 and go to it and change the type from object to transform. It always just defaults to that base object, which is kind of the base level type for all of the objects in C#. And here I can see that I can shoot. My blaster's working. I can go pick up a key and it goes to key mode. I can hit 3 to switch back to blaster, switch to my key, and toggle these things on and off. If I'm on my blaster, I shoot shots. If I'm on my key, I toggle items. So far, so good. I think it's time for me to commit. So I'll make sure I've saved my scene, go to plastic and say that we've added the blaster as an item. It's got my duck behavior re-added there. I moved it around. Just ignore that. We're just going to check in these other files.